Hello and welcome with enough prep, man, and talking about a topic that I've been meaning for a while, of essay on, and I wanted to come to you guys about it, and I think more relevant again with the New 52 almost being replaced by the Snyderverse, something that DC fans have rejected equally as they did the New 52 also extremely popular as well. Of readers. Just kind of in the 52 DC fans text of representation and the vision of ethnic minorities in the Justice League. So who better representation of Minority Justice League? Is it Cyborg or is it question? I hope to discuss a lot more about the different well, basically how comics progressed since the 90s, early 2000s, and then the difference when it goes into the New 52 and into comic book movies that are in the Snyderverse. So I think that's a compelling reason to discuss this. So I'm going to read most of it, but at times I'm going to stop and discuss what has been written a little bit more in one day. Full disclosure, I wrote so this wasn't something I wrote recently. This was actually something written. It was basically written some time ago when I think before Man of Steel even came out, or maybe just after Man of Steel. So yeah, let's read this together, and thanks so much. And if anybody wants to talk in between or ask questions, I will be answering questions after. So let's go. So the essay starts, introduction to the New 52. The New 52 has made many drastic changes in the DC universe. Unpopular the die-hard DC fan base. It is set about cosmetically transitioning the DC universe from an epic tale of modern gods, from Prometheus to Batman and Lex Luthor, and from Hercules to Superman and Wonder Woman, to the dark and gloomy world of fallen angsty deities who supposedly fit the sensibilities of a more cynical age. So this really covers, both the New 52 and, of course, the Snyderverse as well. So the way the philosophy of creating these characters is kind of, there's been a generational break in how we see them. However, many of our generation feel the changes are necessary and even counterproductive. In an age so cynical, in recession with constant wars on terror and now COVID-19 and economic collapse, only a heartbeat away, some feel now more than any time our superheroes should inspire hope and be an escape from that said dreariness, or at least tackle the issues of the day as they always have in past. The times when comics have transcended the medium and become art have been when these fantastic characters have been unshackled from their restraints and been allowed to tackle global issues such as the Cold War, Watchmen, Red Dawn, or Reaganism, Dark Knight Returns, or even deconstructing the medium and what it means to us, Kingdom Come, etc. I suppose this is something that should be taken up in another article, but comics today have simultaneously taken on the darkness and cynicism of our age while completely divorcing themselves from the reality of what makes our current world inspire and foreboding. Never once will you hear the word recession mentioned within the pages of New 52 comics, or well, now they've moved past the New 52. You're getting actually a little bit more realism in the comics and them facing issues of the day a little bit more. But certainly during the New 52 titles, and certainly these aren't words you'd hear in, say, for instance, a Snyder movie, even though it claims to be dealing so heavily with reality. And by the way, I just want to say this is nothing, even though I'm talking about Cyborg and Martian Manhunter here, and the representation, this is nothing to do with Ray Fisher or me not liking his portrayal. I actually like his portrayal of Cyborg, but this is more to do with who's more relevant as a hero of our time, Martian Manhunter or Cyborg. Okay. And especially in terms of representing minorities. So recession mentioned within the pages of the New 52 title. So you'll never hear that. The way you would hear World War II or the New Deal mentioned in the pages of Golden Age comics, or Bronze Age and Modern Age, which tackled issues such as the Cold War or McCarthyism, racism, or drug abuse. Okay. So, you know, when you're looking at something like the 70s, 80s comics, really you did deal, I mean, there was comics where, as you can see, Speedy, who was Green Arrow's, he was very much his ward, or, you know, the Robin to his Batman, right? And he was dealing with drug issues back in the 70s. So there was a huge, you know, after GIs were coming back from the Vietnam War and all of those conflicts in Southeast Asia, you know, there was a big heroin problem. So again, these comics started to reflect that. And, you know, from the inception of comics, comics were dealing with, you know, it might have been silly, but they actually did deal with things like World War II. It was very much in the pages of the comics, and that's what made them relevant. Whereas these more cynical comics that say that they're dealing much more with reality nowadays, what we find is actually they're much more divorced from reality. You'll never hear problems that are genuine problems of the day being actually tackled in the pages of these comics. So I think there's a bit of insincerity when many of these guys do suggest that you know, these modern comics are dealing with worldly issues. So this was an age of creativity in head on to the generation of everyday problems they face. Then that the writers of the New 52 were children of the Silver Age of comics, which timidly spiraled out of an era of extreme censorship in the comic book industry thanks to the 1954 Comic Code of Authority, which prohibited even the slightest seditious or subversive material from fear of corrupting their young readers. The tone of New 52 books can then be seen as an act of reversing the principles of Silver Age by creating a wholly dark yet mute and equally detached world of superheroes. The editorial mantra seeming of that age, the Silver Age, that being the editorial mantra of this age seeming to be, if it isn't dark and gritty, it's not getting in. And I'm talking specifically about DC here. even when that tone does not necessarily fit the characters they are portraying. And this is where we're going into Zack Snyder's kind of portrayal of things. In a word that is either celebrated or dreaded, the whole DC world is becoming Nolanized. The problem, however, is a lot of the time, many of the progressive elements of the modern age have been dropped simply to make characters grittier, but nonetheless with little or no substance. Jeff Johns, who most recently has taken on writing duties on the Justice League, this was back when he was writing the Justice League for New 52, is a self-proclaimed Silver Age fan. As such, in the reboot of the Justice League in the New 52, he rewound the clock, changing JL New 52 back to their first roster, which included Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman as secretary, Aquaman. So Wonder Woman was a secretary in in the Silver Age. Aquaman, The Flash, and Green Lantern. It is in this context that we can understand that a man who grew up reading Wonder Woman as a secretary in the Justice League has now turned her into the love interest for Superman, clearly needing a stronger man to guide her. So again, remember that I wrote this some years back. So this isn't exactly pertaining to what Jeff Johns is actually doing now. So yeah, what I would say is that in terms of what Jeff Johns is doing now, he's actually doing quite the opposite of that, and he's gone to a super light-hearted aesthetic, which he's now championing more than ever, which equally has its basic, but yeah. So but back then, the way he was treating Wonder Woman was he used her much like it was Wonder Woman was used in the early incarnations. Jeff Johns used her like she was used in the early incarnations as a kind of secretary to the Justice League, and now she was Superman's girlfriend in his version. So he's always had a problem with depicting Wonder Woman. However, Johns had a problem when reversing back to the Silver Age members of the Justice League, primarily the lack of black and brown faces to be found amongst the founding members, which was likely to be upsetting to a generation of progressive comic book fans who grew up on the animated series. In the JL animated series, Hal Jordan was replaced in his duties as Green Lantern by fellow Corps member, or Green Lantern Corps member, John Stewart. And of course, there was the ever mysterious, strangely African-sounding green alien, the Martian Manhunter. You only have to look at fan casts for the characters, as well as his television debut in Smallville, and of course now brilliantly played in Supergirl, to see it was obvious that many inexplicably began to presume that Martian Manhunter was black. It soon became almost canon for his civilian disguise to be depicted as either a black man or sometimes even Asian. This assumption about Martian Manhunter was all the more puzzling when we think about that in his original publication, his secret identity was that of Detective John Jones, a hard-boiled and notably very Caucasian Gotham PD detective who solved crime using his array of amazing Martian abilities. Not only did he resonate with ethnic minorities, he became a fan favorite for them as widely recognized as he was widely recognized for being a very interesting and tragic character in his own right, much more than John Stewart. But why? Is this question, as well as whether Cyborg is a good replacement for Martian Manhunter, that I will discuss in this article. That's basically, the kind of intro to this article, where I'm really kind of trying to get at what is it about Martian Manhunter that I think appeals to ethnic minorities, probably even more so than Cyborg, even though, Cyborg is directly, an African American, as opposed to, Martian Manhunter. So the first thing to look at is what I'm going to call the Jeff Johns problem. So the Jeff Johns problem is a big one. I'll let us just put it this way, so Jeff Johns has been one of my favorite and yet most frustrating comic book writers in recent years. Even more so now, we're hearing more and more kind of, albeit vague, allegations about him, which makes this particular essay that I wrote quite a while ago all the more salient. Really, it's funny that all of these kind of things are happening to him, because even just by reading his comics, I noted a potential for some racial insensitivity. But nonetheless, I'll just say this: I don't know. He's innocent until proven guilty, but I can say that from my reading of his comics, I just saw this issue, independently of any allegations that have come against him. So on one side, I absolutely revere his talent. More than any other DC writer on staff, Jeff has been able to take the classic stories of some of my favorite heroes and modernize them without corrupting the original concept, made them and their villains so unique. He has found great voices for an assortment of previously underused and undervalued comic characters, lost in the shuffle of DC's Batman and Superman love fest, which has more lately become a Batman love fest. One just has to look at the accolade he's received for his update of such characters as Shazam, a comic I can't wait to get in trade, as I enjoyed it so much. It's a really great comic, the Shazam New 52 comic, and it's basically, if you've seen the Shazam movie, it's just a better version of the Shazam movie. So his work on Green Lantern and Aquaman has brought the two characters a new generation of hardcore fans, almost rivaling the passion of Batman fanboys. I personally have highly anticipated the sequel to his brilliant Batman Earth 1, which some people don't like, but I really like. I like really different takes on heroes, as long as they remain true to the core of the character. And I think that one did very much remain true to the core of the character, while some interesting changes that were fun. They were fun changes, so they were kind of worth doing. So it was in Batman Earth 1, in which, again, he is given eyes to the character and some of his most neglected, like, while staying true to the source. That is what Jeff Johns is so brilliant at. Always takes the underdog characters, those who have flown under the radar, and he shows just how cool they can be. As a Wonder Woman fan, I was also pleased that he brought Cheetah back to the limelight in the pages of Justice League. He did a really good job with Cheetah, actually, which is surprising for how he really fucked up. He really fucked up the Wonder Woman 1984 movie on a script level. So, however, there is also a dark side to Jeff Johns. His reverence for certain characters, his purism and unwavering attachment to certain periods of comic book history, has sometimes come at the expense of other fan favorites and, quite frankly, sensible storytelling. So this was very, very predictive of his influence on the DCEU, where he auto-corrected Zack Snyder's universe by doing something I think which in parts was better, but in parts was really a lot worse. So he gave us Shazam, which was good. He gave us Wonder Woman 1, which was good. But he gave us Aquaman, which I don't like, but many people, it appealed to many people, made $1 billion. So he gave us those movies, but he also auto-corrected and gave us Wonder Woman 1984, which is arguably the worst movie in the DCEU. I don't think it is, but I could listen to arguments for that. And he also, of course, gave us the debacle that was Justice League, or at least he was part of how that came to be. So when one reads Geoff Johns, it's like reading the work of an extremely biased comic book nerd. It becomes so obvious when he's enamored by a character and when he has a distaste for another. It is also clear that he formed these extreme biases in childhood during his love affair with the Silver Age of comics. This has become somewhat of a frustration to those who grew up on JL, the animated series, or reading the modern age pre-New 52 JL comics. So many changes have been made to the dynamic of the group by taking away colorful characters such as Wally West, or once again bringing back Hal Jordan, who, when in the hands of Geoff Johns, clearly doesn't play well with others and may well be best suited to his own title. By his clear issue with writing strong female characters, therefore relegating Wonder Woman to her Silver Age status. Once secretary, now mere love interest. However, one of the most significant changes came in the form of ousting Martian Manhunter from the core team. Because of his faithfulness to the original JA team, his revamp has been more a retread, reversing the lineup of the original team up. So, a problem arose. If he were to stay true to the Silver Age lineup, he would have to admit any characters of ethnic origin, something I'm sure editors at DC were very nervous about. It may well have occurred to Geoff that maybe he could use Martian Manhunter to photo, since he was part of the team. The animated show covered its back because although Martian Manhunter was clearly perceived as black in the show, just in case they had John Stewart, Green Lantern. So basically they back themselves up. They put in two ethnic characters, one ethnic character who's an alien and one ethnic character who's a human, which is John Stewart. Obviously, Geoff Johns was passionate about putting the Silver Age roster back together and watched his man Hal on the team. So John Stewart was a no-go, and wanted his man Hal on the team. So John Stewart was a no-go. However, on the other side of that was the fact John Stewart was just a counterpart or sidekick to the main hero, who was originally a white male, something that comics and movies have often come under attack for by lesbian and gay and ethnic, as well as feminist critics. One only has to think Supergirl and Batwoman, or the Lone Ranger and Tonto, or Green Hornet and Kato, to see where they're coming from. Most superheroes who are women or ethnic or lesbian or gay in the DC universe have been mere counterparts to an original white male hero, and therefore have never really had their own story, which in many ways reflects the whole narrative of Occidental history, where the narrative of all other races are a mere footnote in the chronicles of Western conquest and colonial adventures. So, in an age where equality and racial diversity is outwardly championed by most industries, especially the entertainment industry, DC could not afford for the New 52 Justice League to seem like a white boys club, a white boys and girl club. Interestingly enough, again, everything I'm saying you see actually reflected in the Justice League Snyder Cut and Snyder's vision of the Justice League. And the same problems arise out of it. The heroes don't fit together, and we'll see why these heroes, this roster of Justice League, don't fit together, especially when you add Cyborg instead of Martian Manhunter. It was in this light that I believe DC thought having Martian Manhunter as the seventh member may well have been read wrong and seen as offensive to minorities. So we're green aliens now, are we? I say in quotation marks. Is probably the reaction DC expected from ethnic minorities if John was presented as the minority member of the group. something even as a black male myself, I understand. I mean, you just have to think of the reaction by Star Wars fans to something like Jar Jar Binks. Obviously, they didn't want Martian Manhunter to create some kind of huge backlash. Like, you can't just make us, green aliens. Maybe we want a hero from Earth to represent to represent African Americans, on the Justice League team, which is kind of strange when you think about it, because I don't know, like, the Justice League is full of aliens and gods, and I don't know if they necessarily count as white Caucasian themselves. But anyway, the palpable sense of paranoia young straight white males have of offending gays, ethnic minorities, or women is felt everywhere, and this has become even more so. It is very, very. We're living in times that it's very, very scary for white males. They have to walk on eggshells around different communities in case they offend them. And to be fair, it's not exactly like their ancestors and whatever didn't bring this on them. When you think about it, this is just an extreme reaction to a history of, oppression and exploitation and other such things. But nonetheless, it does mean that white males are caught in a very awkward position when discussing anything pertaining to the LGBTQ community, ethnic minorities, women, that kind of stuff. I don't know how white women have been able to put themselves in the category as well. Yeah, actually I do. But, like, put it this way, white women, as much as they have been they've been oppressed and other kind of things, they've also been a part, very privileged in society as well, historically. So whereas there were situations where white women definitely didn't get the best end of the stick, or however you want to call it. They weren't allowed to vote like all women. They had to fight for the vote. They had to do this. Still, their position in society was much more privileged than, say, the LGBTQ community or ethnic minorities. Just saying. Anyway, the workplace, in bars, on streets, in movies and TV, and so on. So in a comic book industry where 99% of the writers, editors, and artists are white, a lot of care has to be given to not offending said groups. Hence, Cyborg, a former Teen Titan, became the 7th member of the Justice League. Why? Simply put, he ticked off all the right boxes DC were looking for in a black character. And this goes the same for Snyder's verse. He's powerful and very useful to the team, so he won't seem as a second tier to the core group. He's smart, not just muscle, which presents ethnic minorities in a better light as intelligent and capable. He has his own story and originally started off an African American, so he's not just a counterpart to an actually white superhero. For all these reasons, Cyborg seemed like a perfect fit to transport from the pages of the Teen Titans to Justice. But was this the right decision? So here's where we talk about, really, was this actually the right decision for, for Cyborg to be basically for Cyborg to have been the person they chose for the New 52, and therefore, because the New 52, unfortunately, it was this hugely divisive comic book run, but the DCEU happened to be starting just at the time that you had this hugely controversial run happening, and at that same time you had the success of the darker Nolan movies. So the movies decided to ape this hugely controversial and much maligned version of the of the DC universe, and hence you get Cyborg on the team of the Justice League. So just a little history of Cyborg. So Cyborg was a character created by Marv Wolfman and artist George Perez. He first appeared in 1980 in a special edition of DC Comics Presents. Cyborg, Victor Stone, is the son of Silas and Eleanor Stone, a pair of scientists who decide to use him as a test subject for various intelligence enhancement projects. However, while these treatments work and Victor's IQ grows to genius levels, he begins to resent this treatment and strikes up a friendship with Ron Evers, a young miscreant who leads him into trouble with the law. This is the beginning of a struggle where Victor strives for his own life, engaging in pursuits of which his parents disapprove, such as athletics and slacking off in class. In addition, Victor still keeps bad company that leads him into incidents such as when he is talked into participating into a street gang fight in which he is wounded. For the most part, however, Victor still has a largely normal life under the circumstances, where he also refuses to follow Evers' grandiose plans for racially motivated terrorism. When he visits his parents at work at Star Labs, so this is following the first origin of Cyborg, an experiment in dimensional travel goes horribly wrong when a massive gelatinous monster crosses over an experimental portal and kills Eleanor. The creature then turns on Victor and severely mutilates him before Silas manages to force the creature back through the portal. To save his son, Silas outfits him with experimental prosthetics of his own design. However, the equipment cannot be worn inconspicuously, thus horrifying Victor to see much of his body and part of his face replaced with sheer metallic limbs and implants. Although Victor wants to die at this shock, he eventually adjusts enough through his resulting physical therapy to control his implants with suitable skill. It is the result of these prosthetics that gives Cyborg a manifold of abilities, including and not limited to technopathy. In the New 52, his origin is slightly reshuffled, and Johns takes away any gang or criminal affiliation. He's just a football jock now, whose father is a scientist. His father, being a scientist, disapproves of Victor's desired career as a football player and wants him to pursue academics. As such, they get into a heated argument in his father's lab about Silas not attending an important game his son's team won. It is at this point a terrible accident happens in the lab, killing all the scientists and seriously disfiguring Victor. His father, as the story goes, rebuilds him using cybernetic implants, thus turning Victor into a modern-day Frankenstein. This is a theme that you'll see again and again with black, based superheroes, especially when it comes to being in the bigger characters. That they are often Frankensteins, freaks, monsters. You just have to think of characters like Spawn, and obviously Cyborg. But there are many others like that, or completely masked. It's very rare that you see a black superhero who's their own superhero, like John Stewart. Who is their own superhero, who isn't disfigured in some way. You've got the sidekicks, of Wonder Woman, like Nubia, or you've got the sidekicks of Green Lantern, Hal Jordan, like John Stewart, etc. But in terms of ones that are their own superhero, to have just a plain-faced, good-looking black person is very, very rare. It's always some Frankensteinish monster, which isn't, funnily enough, Ray Fisher is a very handsome young man, so this doesn't really apply to him, although he's still kind of disfigured, whereas the rest of the Justice League are these godly, larger-than-life, they're kind of these ideals we look up to. So even physically, they represent a kind of ideal that we look up to as well. So Martian Manhunter. Okay, so this is the origin now of Martian Manhunter. I'm going to go through the different origins of Martian Manhunter, which are fascinating. So Martian Manhunter made his debut in August 1953, Batman 78, the Martian Manhunter from Mars. At first, Martian Manhunter's origin story was convoluted in some place and straight up bizarre in others. The story began when brilliant scientist Dr. Erdel created what he thought was a communication device that allowed him to communicate with civilizations from the past or future, as the case may be. In fact, it turned out that the device he created actually could teleport things from the past to present day. Thus, when a green-skinned humanoid creature appears in Dr. Erdel's lab after he switches the device on, both Dr. Erdel and the green-skinned alien are utterly shocked. So it turns out that the alien is actually from an advanced race of Martians who have powers far beyond that of mortal men, including the ability to morph into anything they see. Unfortunately, the shock of the encounter is too much for Dr. Erdel's weak heart, and he has a heart attack, but obviously is alive long enough for John Jones to tell him his story. John becomes stranded on Earth, waiting for his people's technology to advance to a point where they can once again retrieve him from his adopted planet. On Mars, John served as a Martian manhunter, as a manhunter, loosely translated from Martian, a policeman. So naturally, he was attracted to law enforcement, disguising himself as Detective John Jones and solving crimes using an ever-expanding set of superpowers. This came to include super strength, precognitive abilities, including telepathy, flight, and a strange new power called atomic vision that resembled one mild-mannered blue Boy Scouts' heat vision. Interestingly enough, during this whole period, there was no suggestion of Martian Manhunter being the last of his kind, and his disguise was distinctly Caucasian. So it wasn't until John Ostrander's brilliant Martian Manhunter series that much of our would-be superheroes mythos came into focus, and we began to see the potential for the Manhunter as a representative of ethnic minorities. One of the most important changes that Ostrander made was to make Martian Manhunter the most famous superhero in the Southern Hemisphere, and John traveled around Asia and Africa, taking on various disguises and fighting corruption where possible. Martian Manhunter also became one of the most tragic figures in all of comics, and that's saying a lot when Ostrander's revised backstory of Martian Manhunter became canon. So it goes that Martian Manhunter actually came from the planet Melisandre, the planet as we know as the planet we know as Mars. Martian Manhunter's birth parents had him and his twin brother Malefic. However, when his twin brother was born, he was born without telepathic abilities, which on Mars at the time was considered a severe handicap and deformity. As such, while loved by John, he was shunned by Martian society at large. He grew a deep resentment towards the Martians, and thus in later life developed an evil scheme to wipe the Martian race out. In an ambitious endeavor to commit full-scale genocide against his own people, he engineered a contagious virus known as, this is really hard to pronounce, Hiromir's curse. The virus reacted to telepathic energy and carried from one Martian to the next whenever they elected to use their psionic powers. The plague responded to a Martian's innate fear of fire, causing them psychosomatic stress so intense that their bodies and minds would literally burst into flames. John desperately tried to keep his wife and daughter from using their mental gifts, but they were unable and so contracted the plague. His wife was the first to experience the symptoms, and his daughter followed soon after. John was anguished as he watched his family burning to death before his very eyes. The trauma of the event shattered his psyche and nearly drove him insane. Thus, when Erdal teleports John to Earth, John is in a catatonic state, and his tragic story is only revealed to Erdal via telepathic link the two develop while John remains in the coma. It was in Ostrander's marvelous work that we were finally allowed to see the full tragedy of Martian Manhunter's story come to light. The character from then on was depicted as a quiet, stoic individual trying to cope with the trauma of his past while adjusting to how alienated he had become in our world. Amidst a universe full of aliens, Martian Manhunter became the only true alien, a minority of one, alone and alienated in the universe. The tragedy of his extermination, of the extermination of his people, came to resonate with many readers from ethnic backgrounds or marginalized subcultures. The fact he never talked about it, got on with the good fight and found the strength to move on, made him all the more compelling. In 1997, Grant Morrison and Howard Porter added another aspect to his mythology, creating what would become one of John's most feared and powerful foes, the warlike White Martians, or Hyperclan, who posed as superheroes when really they planned to take over the Earth. The 2004 Cartoon Network animated TV show created by Bruce Timm and Paul Dini further evolved and illuminated the mysterious past of the Martian Manhunter, retconning much of his origin, and boy did they ever strike gold. In the pilot episode Martian Manhunter's origin was in the pilot episode of Justice League animated series, Martian Manhunter's origin was once again retold. This time, the aggressive white Martians, or Imperium, became integral to the extermination of John's people, including his wife and daughter. The Imperium were highly advanced and powerful highly advanced and a powerful imperial space power who had wiped out the Green Martian civilization in a whole-scale holocaust of John's species. Much like in the original origin, John's witnesses many of his closest to him die before the Green Martians put up a final fight, but fall in a bloody battle against the invading army. This is something that was actually covered in the Supergirl show in a really, really good way. We also got in this show the brilliant voice acting of Carl Lumley, that is in Justice League animated series. It was brilliant. The voice acting of Carl Lumley, who brought to life the loneliness and tragic sense of detachment that has now become a hallmark of all interpretations of the character. Most striking was his choice to give Martian Manhunter a strangely deep African lilt to his accent, making Martian Manhunter all the more appealing to ethnic minorities. Due to the mass exposure and success of Justice League, the animated show, this version of Martian Manhunter penetrated into the public imagination, becoming the most popular version of the character. And I must say, the Supergirl show really at first did a fantastic job of presenting Martian Manhunter's origin story as well, and showing why it was so kind of relevant, to ethnic minorities, right? I hate these bloody ads. Okay. What is with these ads? So here we go. Does Cyborg's story thematically resonate with minorities? The problem of stereotyping. One of the first and most striking things about Cyborg's first appearance in the 1980s was that he was used to tackle the problems of gang affiliation among ethnic minorities in the United States, right? So that's kind of an interesting thing about, Cyborg, that was kind of relevant to the Black experience, as I kind of mentioned now. So it's a big issue in the amongst American and Latino backgrounds, especially who are targeted by gangs because of their limited liability to legal sanctions. In this context, an African American superhero who comes from a troubled criminal background, but who actually reforms, turning his gifts towards helping society, could actually be relevant and a good role model. However, it's the context of Victor's juvenile delinquency that becomes an issue and rather confusing. First, as we know, before the 1980s, were rarely cast in films or made it to be titular characters in their own comics. If they did, a lot of depictions of black males in the media had them as criminals. In fact, often the only reason a black man would appear in film, especially in the action genre, was as a mugger, a burglar, a drug addict, or dealer of some other or some other criminal element. In short, a threat to society. This obviously did not go unnoticed, and a lot was done to rectify the situation in the media, in which actors like Eddie Murphy and Denzel Washington became mainstream leading men and heroes of their own films. Comic books, in turn, tried to begin capturing minority audiences by creating ethnic counterparts to already established white superheroes such as Green Lantern. Some more progressive comic writers, such as Stan Lee and George Perez, however, knew that this was not the only way to capture this burgeoning market, and much like the appeal of Wonder Woman to girls, the way to capture minority audiences was to create superheroes from minority backgrounds. To Marv Wolfman, also the creator of Blade, and Perez's credit, they also tried to integrate storylines and themes they believed relevant to those communities. The problem, however, was the subtext and lack of realism in the Cyborg story. Many middle-class kids have been driven towards criminal behavior, but it's rare that a child from Victor's background, whose parents were affluent scientists, would be drawn into the world of street crime and gang warfare. Therefore, the criminal background of Cyborg seemed tacked on, mainly or in large part simply because he was black, making the addition of his criminal behavior at best a mere stereotype, and at worst painting anyone whose heritage is African as a potential menace to society, even the ones from privileged backgrounds with no reason to engage in delinquent behavior simply because of their race. Right. So this is not to say that African Americans should be painted as saints in the comics, far from it. We only have to turn to characters like Spawn, right? Or, Batwing. Of Spawn or Batwing, to see how themes socially relevant to those of African descent can be addressed intelligently while staying consistent. In both Spawn and Batwing, some of the darkest chapters of Black history are explored, both beginning as villains only to rise above their upbringing and become heroes. Batwing was a child soldier in the Congo whose parents were murdered in front of him. While a youth, he was forced into becoming a killing machine by the army of the Dawn, who used him to raid villages, murdering his own people for the cause. He became so proficient at killing as a child that by the age of 13, he was promoted to the rank of elite man. After he refuses to follow orders to burn down a village that would result in the deaths of many hundreds of women and children, he is turned on by his commanding officer and goes on the run. Later in life, he is recruited by Batman Inc. to fight crime and corruption in the Congo. In the case of Spawn, we get a very interesting origin with a lot more politically emotive stuff happening in it, with a lot of politically emotive themes. Spawn was once Al Simmons, an American special ops agent for the CIA. For years, he was one of their most efficient ground agents, executing highly dangerous secret operations. However, Al begins to have pangs of conscience when he realizes many of his missions involving killing innocent civilians, including women and children. Wanting to retire, the CIA consider the information he has too sensitive, and therefore they set him up, his own partner killing him while on his last mission. Due to his involvement in the murder of many innocents, he goes to hell, where he's transported into or transformed into the Hellspawn. As you can see, in both of those stories, we get a glimpse into the Black experience, whether it be the horrors of war and use of child soldiers in Africa, or the experience of many African Americans in the armed forces in America, especially during the Vietnam War. For instance, many GI are suffering symptoms of newly diagnosed psychological ailment known as post-traumatic stress disorder. Psychologists directly connected the large number of soldiers coming back from Vietnam suffering from drug addiction and an assortment of other mental illnesses as a direct result of their horrible experiences at war. And this concurrent stress of not knowing when or if they were going to die. This disorder and its other comorbid expressions were not limited to African Americans, but also suffered by many other ethnic minorities and working class men who served in the armed forces during that time. With the wholesale neglect of these soldiers once they arrived back home, this remains one of the most tragic chapters in race relations in America. It is appropriate then that a Black superhero like Spawn's mythology, addressed as similar, it is appropriate then that a Black superhero like Spawn's mythology addressed a similar betrayal by his country, the United States. Assassinated by the very country he sacrificed so much for, Spawn in the early 90s became a big hit amongst white and Black readers alike, because the comic addressed unashamedly relevant social and political issues. It actually became the highest selling comic of the 1990s, had a film, and he is now on his way to having a second. When you look at the difference between how Cyborg was presented in the 1980s and how Spawn and Batwing are presented, we can immediately see the contrast. Socially relevant issues were explored over a whole run of Batwing and Spawn, whereas they were just tacked onto Cyborg in a single issue and after dropped, simply making him into a stereotypical generic Black character. So that's basically what they did. You know, even though he had this beginning where he was in a gang, and that's what turned him into, that was one of the things that was part of his history as Cyborg. Nonetheless, what you found is that they didn't, the gang affiliation things, the gangs that he was part of, didn't remain part of the story once he'd actually become Cyborg. Whereas with Spawn and Batwing, the actual central issue of their origin becomes what they deal with once they're superheroes. So in the New 52, however, they've now addressed some of this and tried to flesh Victor out as a character. The gang affiliation has now been dropped as Jeff Johns quite sensibly realized it made no sense to Victor's background. Instead, we have an interesting story of a boy who grows up desiring his father to be proud of his accomplishments. Still a stereotype since he's a high school jock and football player, which is very typical of a Black, people in America or African Americans in America, which is kind of funny. You know, his parents are scientists. Maybe he could be a scientist. That might have been nicer than him being a football player. Maybe he's a scientist, but he's working in an area that his dad doesn't approve of, that he thinks that, he's too talented to be a doctor. He wants him, a medical doctor. He wants him to be a physicist, but, he just wants to help people. I think that would be a better kind of story for Cyborg than being a football jock. But, that's just me. You could still have him be like very good at American football, but like he's a very like strong lad or something like that. But anyway, it is an interesting dynamic and slightly more organic than the previous tale spun. But now the problem is that his story still is kind of generic, reaching nowhere near the heights and operatic scale of white counterparts, right? So the other members of the Justice League all have better, more iconic stories. And I don't just mean because we've known them for so long, but because they're genuinely more iconic than anything you're getting from Cyborg. Superman, last son of a doomed planet. Batman, a man born of tragedy, now avenger of the night. Wonder Woman, demigod, and champion of the gods, or daughter of Zeus. And of course, then there's Cyborg, the black football player with cybernetic implants. He is now easily the flattest character in the cast, and the one a lot of us just wish wasn't there. Let's be honest. So I'm going to leave this as part one, and we're going to discuss later Cyborg as the sidekick and some other aspects. So this will be my part one of this, me reading this essay and discussing the Cyborg's relevance within the Justice League. Yeah. So thanks very much. See you on the side. Love you 3000, and please like, subscribe, do me a favor, give me a high five, smash the like button, and comment below. Do you like Cyborg or Martian Manhunter? Who do you think is better for representation of ethnic minorities or blacks? Do you think Cyborg's better, or do you think Martian Manhunter is better? And tell me why. I'm kind of interested to know. But yeah, have a good one. Hello and welcome to another episode of With Enough Prep Time. I'm your host, the Nerd Man, and today we're going to be carrying on with our discussion of whether or not Cyborg as Cyborg or Martian Manhunter are better representatives for ethnic minorities. So here we go. So yeah. So the first part we're going to read. So this is the second part. I did a video which I'll link to you, but I'll link you to below. But the first part was looking at the history of the two characters, and now I'm going to actually address, their position within the Justice League. So Cyborg and the ethnic sidekick revisited. As stated earlier in the article, there is a long tradition of having ethnic sidekicks for the white heroes, often servants, vassals, or drivers to the titular character. As far as I know, this began with the creation of Tonto, meaning fool or dumb in Spanish, the sidekick to the Lone Ranger, whose history is marred with controversy. Most recently, the Native American character who was played by white actor Johnny Depp, meaning one of the few roles in Hollywood that could be played by a Native American was passed on to a white actor instead. In the superhero genre, perhaps the most famous ethnic sidekick is Kato, driver to millionaire newspaper magnate Britt Reed, who also moonlights as vigilante Green Hornet. However, the focus of the show was easily shifted to Kato once the TV show aired in the 1960s due to the martial arts prowess of Bruce Lee, who played Kato for the serial. Soon, many were just calling it the Kato Show. But even with Bruce's electric performance as Kato, he was still turned down for a starring role in his own series, Kung Fu, which he had originally pitched as a concept to Warner Brothers. Instead, the role of Shaolin monk traveling the Wild West went to white non-martial artist actor Dan Carradine, Carradine, with Bruce not even receiving acknowledgement for even coming up with the concept. The general concept of the ethnic sidekick was he was to be the raw physical power behind the more cerebral, capable veteran, often of a higher station in life or rank, often speaking some kind of street lingo or patois or, a kind of Occidental wisdom. Curiously, Occidental or Asian wisdom, mysticism, should I say. Curiously enough, many of these sidekicks ended up resonating much more with younger audiences and becoming far more popular than their masters or superiors. Huggy Bear easily became the most memorable and iconic character in Starsky and Hutch, while the A-Team's Mr. T, who played B.A. Baracus, ended up becoming far more famous than his commanding officer, John Hannibal Smith, much to the chagrin of co-star George Peppard. You might ask, what has this got to do with Cyborg? Well, the answer is that in spite of many attempts to make him equal, Cyborg has not been depicted as such. Thus far, in the Justice League, his portrayal has been rather uneven, most of the time seeming more like Batman's ethnic sidekick. And I'd like to kind of preface this by looking even at the nightmare scenes that you see with Zack Snyder's nightmare scenes, where you see Cyborg actually at the back of Batman as Batman is, the front and center, and Cyborg is there kind of as his sidekick essentially. We'll look. So here you go. You've got Batman there in the background, and of course the instinct for Snyder, who thinks he's doing Ray Fisher and Cyborg a favor by coupling him up with Batman, is actually exactly what we're talking about, which is Cyborg is not made into an equal member of the Justice League. He is made into a sidekick for Batman, something where Batman knows how to use his powers better than actually Cyborg does, right? So this is something definitely that happens in the Snyderverse that you'll see. So there was one image where you really, I mean, this isn't it, but there was images where you saw that Cyborg was definitely in the background there to, to Batman, who was, we even saw it in the trailer recently. Right. Well, yeah. So I at the moment the kind of image I can't find it, but yeah, this was in the Joker scene where you see Cyborg there in the background. Basically, he's there to, he's there as what he is. He's the sidekick to Batman, right? And I have a massive problem with this. I think this is a terrible way to use Cyborg, and it means that you really get an unequal. And part of the problem, which you'll see, I'll talk about later. So you might ask, so I asked you, you might ask what this has to do with Cyborg. Thus far in the Justice League, his portrayal has been rather uneven, more of the time seeming more like Batman's ethnic sidekick, the raw physical strength behind Batman's brilliant strategic mind. When it comes to when it comes to strategy, Cyborg, despite supposedly being one of the smartest on the team, rarely shows any agency or problem solving of his own. You just have to look back at the Justice League film where basically Cyborg was just backing up Batman's plans. Much like Wonder, whereas everybody else had their own individual opinion on the things, they had their own individual attitude. Cyborg was talking about like the probabilities and statistics and telling, basically saying, yeah, Batman's right. That was what his position was there for. Much like Wonder Woman has fallen into the stereotypical role of love interest for Superman, so has Cyborg fallen into the convenient role of Batman's sidekick. Often, Batman is found telling Cyborg how to use his powers to best serve the interest of a particular mission. In fact, most of the time, Cyborg is doing anything in the story. It is at the side of the Caped Crusader, who effectively uses Cyborg as just another one of his gadgets in utility belt. Again, I believe this is down to Cyborg's lack of definition. Being the only core member who currently and has never starred in his own publication doesn't help either. That's actually changed now since I wrote this article. He did get his own little comic run, which wasn't very successful. Batman is the gadgets guy, the brains guy, the strategy guy, which means Cyborg kind of steps on his territory. With the huge following Batman has, this can't be allowed. So, with the huge following that Batman has, it can't be allowed that another character does his thing better than him. So if Cyborg's got gadgets and he's supposed to be strategic and clever, you can't have that while Batman's on the team. So what they have to do is make Cyborg a kind of extension of what Batman can do. So Batman is using Cyborg, basically telling Cyborg what to do and how to use his powers. So we end up with a Cyborg being relegated to glorified ethnic sidekick, which is more a hark back to the 70s and 80s TV serials mentality than anything progressive, right? So in the end, it doesn't do much for Cyborg, and it doesn't do much for Batman, him being on the team. Now let's compare that to, of course, what happens with Martian Manhunter. Now, Martian Manhunter is I'm going to call this part victim of war, colonialism, and genocide. Martian Manhunter, while technically not a member of a human minority, is the ultimate minority of one. In this alone, he is a very powerful speaker and representative, not just of African Americans' not just of African Americans, but all minorities. His story also appeals as many of the tragic events that have plagued the history of minorities and marginalized groups shows up in Manhunter's mythology. One of the most glaring comparisons of his mythos to the modern history of minorities is the genocide of his people by an imperial power. In the recent past, many minorities have been subject to genocidal campaigns by the European and North American powers. It's been something etched into the collective consciousnesses of minorities, and something we still feel the after effect of to this day. We are still not that far removed from generations of our ancestors who suffered at the hands of colonialism and the thought that we were inferior races, whose only value was to be enslaved, exploited, or exterminated. To see a fictional character go through the same grief, I'm sure, is emotive for everyone, but is especially relatable for ethnic minorities. Whether it be Aborigines, Jews, American Indians, or those from the Southern African countries, each have been victims of attempted or wholesale extermination. In the Western countries, especially the USA, where racial tensions remain high, the quest for equal rights, opportunities, and representation are a constant reminder to minorities of their history. It is no wonder that many of these groups, and even a lot of white readers, tend to see real pathos in the story of John Jones of the animated series, and since then of even Supergirl. He became a fan favorite even on the Supergirl show. I'm also really annoyed at his casting in in Zack Snyder's Justice League, which I think again he's just done to be cool and hasn't actually looked at the potential of what the character actually can be. That very much annoys me, because I think a lot of this stuff of the genocide and his and how he was brought up is going to be absent from Zack Snyder's treatment of the character. I don't see why Martian Manhunter would decide to become a general at all, given his history. But then again, there we go. So Aborigines, Jews, American Indians, or those from Southern African countries, each have all been victims of attempted or wholesale extermination. In the Western countries, especially the USA, where racial tensions remain high, the quest for equal rights, opportunities, and representation are a constant reminder to minorities of their history. It is no wonder that many of those groups, and even a lot of white readers, tend to see real pathos. Tend to see real pathos in the story of John Jones of the animated series. True, most Chinese Americans or African Americans did not suffer the disgraces their parents did, but the fact remains that it is something that said peoples are still healing from. As such, I believe there is a lot of missed opportunity to tackle some of these issues in the comics of Martian Manhunter. I honestly feel that is why so many have this inexplicable love for this character. No one from the animated series who's missing from the current roster got so much energized support to join the New 52, or in fact, the Justice League, as a Martian Manhunter, John Jones. And I think this is why. He received so much support, in fact, that DC had to make him the poster child for the JL of America. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying only minorities like this character. So I'm not saying only minorities like Martian Manhunter. I know more people like him. But it's because of his tragic past. And it's because of his tragic past. But I am saying he resonates so well because there's this sense that we know a bit about the turmoil going on inside him. I also think the sense of pity he elicits from readers of all races is because his story is one all too familiar in recent history, made most infamous by the Holocaust. His people, the victim of an absolute annihilation by the imperial white Martians, reflect so many minority experiences in the early 20th century, not just blacks or African Americans. In this sense, I believe this is one of the reasons that John may actually be a more suitable candidate to represent ethnic minorities than Cyborg. So that was something I wrote. An essay I wrote on Martian Hunter and what I saw as his appeal to ethnic minorities, and I think it. The thing I would say about Martian Manhunter is this, just to finish, that there are a lot of, there's a sense in which Martian Manhunter has an equal story, a story that, much like Superman's Doom Planet or Wonder Woman's, Paradise Island, or Batman's operatic origin in which his parents are shot down in front of him, turning him instantly into an Avenger of the Night. Green Lantern and his intergalactic police force. The Flash, this normal human being who suddenly is blessed with the powers of the Speed Force. This incredibly mystical force that connects them to the quantum universe. All of these characters have these big stories, and I think Martian Manhunter just fits in so well with that. And it's a shame that because he's not actually just a black, person, he's actually green, whatever, when he suits up. Even though his civilian guise has more recently been turned into that of a black guy, nonetheless, we get this thing where he's not properly seen as a representation of African Americans. And the other thing I want to mention just before I leave is that I think even blacks, African Americans, and ethnic minorities in general, although in this case it's African American or black, they respond better to him than Cyborg, because Cyborg, for all intents and purposes, is this freakish monster kind of character who's there amongst these great looking gods and stuff like that. And that's again another reason why I love the actor who's Snyder has cast as Martian Manhunter, but I don't like him as Martian Manhunter. The reason being is because, again, there's an opportunity to represent a youthful, young, equal kind of godlike figure to the rest of the Justice League, who are all, physically speaking, they are these kind of ideals, again, that we aspire to or want to be. So I want a black person who is young and good looking and whatever, and the same age as the rest of the Justice League, to represent Martian Manhunter, so that we have also this young, youthful person to aspire to. And this is kind of the same with if they go into using John Stewart as well. But that's me. Thanks so much for joining me today in my discussion of Cyborg and Martian Manhunter. I'd like to know what you feel. Who do you feel is the best representation, minority representation for, young, who's the best minority representation? Is it Cyborg or is it Martian Manhunter? I know Martian Manhunter is an alien, so do you not see him as a black character at all? Or is Cyborg better representation because of, he comes, essentially, he's an African American, whatever you want to say, or how he looks, or that he might be a bit stereotypical, being the football player, or once being gang affiliated. No matter how you want to look at it, he is nonetheless actually an African American character. So maybe that's good enough for representation. So thanks very much. Please like, comment, subscribe, and do me a favor, give me a high five, smash the like button, and of course, I'll see you on the flip side, and I love you 3000.